welcome to Two Nates on Sports. My name is Nathan Simon. With me, as always, is Nathan Kwan, and we have a new guest with us to talk the NBA. His name is Kevin Hahn. Say hello.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Perfect. All right, let's dive right into the NBA and the Rockets, who are having an interesting month, to say the least. Take it away, Nathan.
The Rockets are on a 5-game road trip out east. They are 2-2 so far. They won in Memphis, then they had two back-to-back losses in Milwaukee and Boston, and then last night they won in Philadelphia, 123-118. James Harden, who had a really bad shooting game in Boston, bounced back with 51, 13, and 13. I believe that's his fourth 40-point triple-double of the year, and I think that ties Oscar Robertson all-time in NBA history for a season. The team continues to score a bunch of points, but I think those back-to-back losses in Milwaukee and Boston, the defense has kind of regressed back to the beginning of the season. The interior with Nene and Clint Capella, I think they've struggled. Capella coming back from the injury, and then Ryan Anderson really can't guard anybody. And I think they went through a stretch of schedule where they played really well defensively, but they've struggled recently. Kevin, you watched the game last night. What do you think their keys, and do you see them potentially making a trade at the deadline?
Yeah, so I caught the first half of the game last night, and what I noticed was they ran the pick and roll pretty well with Harden and either Capella or Harrell. And I think the problem going forward with this team is the rebounding, actually. Like the game against Milwaukee, they actually shot pretty well from the field, 50% from the field and 40% from three. But they got out-rebounded 47-35. And I think this will be an issue when the Rockets face bigger teams when they like to play small. So looking forward to the trade deadline, they might want to consider adding some size or some depth to the center position or to the power forward, and also maybe a perimeter defender. I was thinking maybe Thabo Sefolosha from the Hawks, but I don't know what pieces they could give up for him.
Yeah, Corey Brewer's name has been thrown around. He's been hot and cold this year, a lot better than last year, but he's got a pretty friendly contract relatively on the market, and so a team could take him on. Yeah, so let's move on, talk about some stories on the NBA. LeBron James made news this past week. He sent out a series of tweets. The Cavs have been struggling. They had lost 3 in a row. And he was basically calling out management and saying that they do need another playmaker on that team. They have the highest payroll in the NBA. Cavs management seemingly has done everything LeBron has asked. What do you guys think about LeBron's comments, and were they appropriate? And what do you think about that team in general?
I'll start. I think LeBron is just frustrated his team is underperforming. I mean, they lost 6 of the last 8 games, mainly due to terrible defense. So I think if the Cavs had won most of those games, LeBron wouldn't be complaining to the media so much. And like you said, they have the highest payroll in the league at $127 million. And just to give some perspective on that, the next highest team is the Clippers at $114 million. So this is a really expensive team. And like LeBron says, very top heavy. But I felt it was a moment of weakness for him to call out his guys like Kay Felder and DeAndre Liggins. Pretty much said they were not reliable guys on a contending team. I mean, that's what happens when your starting lineup makes over $100 million. And bottom line, I think LeBron shouldn't be complaining. They have 3 All-Stars on their team, in LeBron, Kyrie, and K-Love. And I think at this point he's sort of scared of the Warriors and their depth because, they obviously added KD in the offseason. They got Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and they also have Livingston, Iguodala, and Ian Clark off the bench. So they got a lot of depth. And I think he feels he needs to match their depth in order to keep up with them in the finals. So he's obviously concerned about his team lacking that depth. But at this point, his team is they have the highest payroll in the league, so there's not much they can do.
Agreed. I think it was very out of character for LeBron to there should be out of character for LeBron to say what he said. I absolutely agree that he doesn't have anything to really complain about, because this is what he wanted, and this is how the team was pretty much like built. Like if you're gonna bring in all these all-stars, you're not gonna have much of a bench. Okay, and that's at the end of the day, like that's what's gonna bite you in the butt. And I don't know if maybe he's like worried that another something that happened in 2011, in which his team that was built with predominantly a ton of all-stars would end up being beaten by a deep, strong team. But if you also look at the Golden State Warriors, who have been again very good this year, can't take away from them. Like in spite of the fact that they still do have like Sean Livingston, Andre Iguodala, Ian Clark, that they still seem to be lacking a lot of depth on their end in some semblance too. And again, this is just what happens when you build a super team, is that you have to sacrifice depth. And so he's got to play with the chips that he has. If Cavs can pull out and get another playmaker, then even more kudos to the Cavs front office. But at the end of the day, that's just how it is. You can't be a pimp and a prostitute at the same time. It just doesn't make any sense. But that's just my take. What do you guys say?
I think the way they built that team is LeBron and Kyrie handle the ball and they do the playmaking, and then they have a bunch of shooting around them. You have a little bit of Kevin Love's post-up sprinkled in, but then you have just a bunch of shooting around. Kyle Korver they got from the Hawks, Iman Shumpert, J.R. Smith's been hurt, but you saw what he could do in the finals last year, Channing Frye, James Jones. And so I think asking for a little playmaker, I think, first of all, they don't grow on trees. There's a player like Rondo who's on the block, but is Rondo necessarily a fit? Will he be able to play off the ball and spot up when Kyrie and LeBron have the ball? I think LeBron has to think about the way the team is structured and the way that it was built. And I think management has done everything that he's asked of them. J.R. Smith is making $12.8 million this year, and he really has struggled. He's been hurt. And really, there wasn't a market out there for him. Teams really shied away. JR, his career has really, before he got with LeBron, has been really up and down. And, I think the Cavs are really bidding against themselves in that market. And then you have veterans like Richard Jefferson, Kyle Korver, who really have one role and they were brought in to do one thing. And so I think the Cavs are really stuck with what they have. You have a player like Tristan Thompson who's making $15 million, but he's like solely a defender and rebounder. And it's just the way the market has played out and the way that team has been built. Let's move on, talk about the Bulls. The Bulls had an interesting week. They blew a 10-point lead to the Hawks. And then after the game, there was fireworks in the locker room with Dwayne Wade and Jimmy Butler calling out the rest of the team, basically saying that the other teammates weren't really that passionate or committed to win. And then point guard Rajon Rondo fired back in an Instagram post. He posted a picture of him, Kevin Garnett, and Paul Pierce, and said that the problem really wasn't with the rest of the team, it was with the leadership. What did you guys think about what happened in Chicago this week?
I think I agree with Rondo in this instance, because I agree with him that Wade and Butler should have kept their issues with the team inside the locker room. And calling them out over the media doesn't really accomplish anything. I think Kenny Smith on Inside the NBA said it best. He said Wade and Butler calling the team out over the media is sort of a cop-out. So they don't really have to deal with the problem or have to face the players and discuss the issues with them in the locker room. I think, again, it was a moment of weakness for Wade and Butler to, air their grievances to the media when it was, in my opinion, completely unnecessary.
As a Mavs fan, I feel like I have to go against Rondo on this to some extent. But let me put it this way: this is the third team in a row that Rondo has seemed to have falling out with at some point. And I mean, and even then, you have to also consider Boston Celtics to be part of that list as well. And he's someone that seems to always like butt heads, and someone that always seems to really struggle with being part of a team and just not upsetting team chemistry. If anything, I feel like some of these comments might have been also directed a bit at him as well. I mean, granted, that also being said, I do believe that it was a moment of weakness by Dwayne Wade and Jimmy Butler to go to the media instead of actually like trying to take care of this internally. But at the same time, maybe there's always that possibility that they actually tried to, and at this point, there's just like nothing else that they could do. And this Chicago team started off pretty hot and then just has now just really just stagnated. I mean, at the beginning of the year, everyone was talking about how this team was going to have trouble keeping everyone on the floor between Jimmy Butler, Dwayne Wade, and Rajon Rondo, since these all three of these guys are best when they have the ball in their hands, and they don't exactly have the best 3-point shot. And I think part of their frustration is being born out of just this kind of poor fit among all three.
Yeah, I put this on management. The Bulls have really confused me with what they've done. They fired Tom Thibodeau, a coach of the year, a couple seasons ago. And then they brought in Fred Hoiberg, who's a young coach. He had really a lot of success at Iowa State. And then this past offseason, they got rid of Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah, and they brought in veterans, really, Wade and Rondo. And so I really don't see the direction of this team and what they thought about it going forward. They weren't that good last year, and then they really kind of went sideways to backwards this past offseason. They have a mix of veterans who are really on the downsides of their career and a bunch of young guys like Jerry Grant, Paul Zipser, Cristiano Felicio, Isaiah Cannon, Amy Miritich. And so I think what they need to do is they either need to change their coach and really get a guy that has more NBA experience and is a veteran and can handle personalities like Wade and Rondo, or they needed to get rid of the veterans and just go completely young with McDermott and Miritich and build around them. Because right now they're just kind of treading water and they're not really going anywhere. I don't think it does them any good to get in the playoffs as a 7 or 8 seed and get killed by either the Cavs or Raptors. So, I mean, I really put this on management because I don't think they constructed a situation that could lead to the most success for that team. Another big star on the trade block is Carmelo Anthony. So the Knicks came into the year with really high expectations. I was in New York City in August and walking around the city, just talking to various fans. A lot of people were hopeful for maybe 50 wins, but this team is very bad. They're not going anywhere. And so they're looking to trade Carmelo Anthony. He's been linked to teams like the Cavs, the Celtics, and most recently the Clippers. He has a full no trade clause, so he can basically pick which situation he wants to go to, if he wants to go to. How do you guys see where he ends up?
Yeah, so I think the Knicks, clearly they're trying to rebuild around Porzingis, so they're trying to get rid of Anthony and his contract, and it looks like the most likely destination is going to be the Clippers. But the problem is the Knicks don't want to potentially absorb Crawford's contract, and it looks like the only tradable pieces on that team for the Clippers, maybe Austin Rivers, Jamal Crawford, JJ Redick. And reportedly, it looks like the Knicks aren't looking for any of the Clippers stars and Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre. I think they're looking for a third team in this deal, whoever's willing to maybe take on Crawford or maybe Redick. But it looks like Clippers, they're hesitant. I would imagine they're hesitant to give up Redick as well, since he's such a core in their offense. So it looks like they might be looking for that third team. And if they do, it looks like that deal has a high chance of moving forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm just like sort of, in a sense, I'm like weirdly shocked that the Knicks are so ready to just like get rid of Carmelo at all costs, considering like how much they gave up to get him in the first place. I mean, and granted, I understand that like his production has really fallen off, and he's never really been necessarily the most efficient player in the league, but even still, I mean, like just imagine this like LA Clippers team with CP3, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan, and Carmelo Anthony. Like the Clippers need a volume shooter that can shoot from the outside at a reasonable rate. And like even though like he's not the best from 3-point range, he has a .366 3-point field goals percentage, and that's pretty good. And I mean, like if they're able to keep then that is a starting five that will challenge the Golden State Warriors. I mean, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, I'm just like I have to assume that there has to be at least two first round picks going towards the Knicks. Or I mean, otherwise they're really down on Carmelo Anthony, and they really genuinely believe that they'll be better by getting rid of him in and of himself. And that to me is like, I mean, I remember when I first started following the NBA, and the first draft class I remember was LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, and Josh Howard. Like just the absolute insanity of having all of those stars being drafted, as well as Darko Milicic. People forget about him, but he won the NBA championship in I believe his second year, and I mean that's I think that's Hall of Fame worthy in my opinion. But in all seriousness, I mean maybe it's just like just perception and just me having trouble letting go of the past. But I mean I still think Carmelo Anthony is a very good player. And I think the Knicks would be doing themselves a disservice by not trying to get at least two first round picks.
Yeah, on the Knicks, I think Phil Jackson really. There are comments on that he made earlier this year on whether or not Carmelo could fit into the triangle offense. There were rumors that came out that who really didn't want Carmelo to opt out of that contract and re-sign that long-term deal. He just wanted him to opt in for another year and see how it would go. So I really don't think Phil Jackson has wanted Carmelo, and I think with the team struggling so badly, I think they're ready to just move on, as Kevin said, and turn the team over to Kristaps Porzingis. I think we'll really find out how much Carmelo values winning, whether or not he gets traded, because he does have that full no trade clause. He's been linked with Boston and Cleveland. Cleveland turned down a Anthony for Kevin Love trade. And then we're not sure if Carmelo really wants to go to Boston at all. People around the leagues feel that Carmelo is just comfortable in New York, and he doesn't want to leave, even no matter how bad the situation is. And so we'll see what happens. I think a logical destination for him would be LA. LA is a similar kind of Hollywood market that New York has. And how he fits in with that Clippers team is he provides them more a consistent option in the half court. And so in the past, it's just been kind of Chris Paul doing isolation play. Maybe they throw it into Blake Griffin on a pick and roll, something like that. But they really haven't had, other than Chris Paul, somebody you can just give the ball to and get out of the way, and he can get you a bucket. And Melo can still do that. It'll be interesting to see what that team's potential ceiling would be, though, in the West. Do you see a Melo on the Clippers surpassing the Spurs or the Warriors?
No, I don't think so. But I think adding Carmelo will definitely bolster their offense and maybe keep them afloat in the 4th or 5th seed and give them a chance for home court advantage in the playoffs. So yeah, definitely adding Carmelo would be huge for them. But the thing is, like, what are they willing to give up for that?
Yeah, and they're really having to stay afloat right now because Chris Paul's out 6 weeks with that thumb injury, and the Jazz are right on their tails for that 4th seed. And so the Clippers really need a boost, and Melo would provide that boost. But let's talk about kind of playoff positioning. We mentioned that Utah and the Clippers are in the 4 and 5 battle. Oklahoma City is in 6th. So they have lost Enes Kanter for, it seems, a long period of time. He broke his arm the other night in a game against the Mavs, where he punched a chair on the bench. And so Oklahoma City is a game and a half ahead of Memphis right now for 6th. And Denver is currently in 8th. The Trailblazers are half game behind them. 2 games behind them is New Orleans. And then you have Sacramento closely behind them, and Minnesota as well. So how do you guys see the bottom of the West playing out, given injuries to Kanter? Jokic went down for the Nuggets, and Rudy Gay also went down for the Kings.
I think it's going to be pretty close when it comes down to March, April, because like you said, Enes Kanter going out is a huge loss for the Thunder. And I can see them dropping a couple seeds when it comes to April. I think it's going to be a fight for the 8th seed between the Thunder, the Nuggets, and the Blazers. But the Blazers have been really disappointing this season. Compared to last season, their defense has been really struggling lately. They allow 110 points per game, which is the 4th worst in the league. And really, they've fallen below expectations. I mean, people were saying like they might have a chance to be like the 4th or 5th seed this year, and that's completely out of reach for them now. So, I think it's going to be a fight for the 8th seed between the Thunder, Nuggets, and Blazers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it just overall, it's just a complete mess. I mean, even like the Dallas Mavericks, who have been pretty bad almost all season, although recently they've pretty much now reached a .500 pace, while handing the Lakers their worst defeat in arguably their history. But they're right now 16-30, and yet are 4.5 games back of the 8th seed. And I think that's really indicative of just like the poor quality of pretty much the bottom of this Western Conference, and just how a bad team can still challenge for an 8th seed. And I think in the end, I think the Jazz and the Thunder can pull it off. And it's hard to really tell with who's probably going to get the 8th seed in terms of just like among like the Nuggets, the Blazers, and even the Pelicans. I mean, the Pelicans at least have Anthony Davis, Trailblazers. They still have McCollum, and they still have Lillard to carry them. But I mean, even then, it's just there's just too much parity among these teams to really figure out, to really decide on like any one specific team that's going to run away with this. And quite frankly, just too poor quality for many people to really like pay attention to, especially since like whoever gets the 8th seed is going to be like pretty much is more than likely going to get swept by the Warriors in the first round. But yeah, what do you think, Quan?
Yeah, I look at a team like Minnesota, which is trending upward. They really have just been really inconsistent. They have a lot of quality wins. They won in LA against the Clippers. They really should have beaten the Rockets twice. They beaten Oklahoma City. I think that team under Tom Thibodeau, it took a while for them to get going, but Karl-Anthony Towns, who I believe is an all-star snub, and we'll talk about in a bit, but he's been playing out of his mind. If you haven't been watching Timberwolves basketball, Zach LaVine has turned into a reliable three-point shooter. You have Shabazz Muhammad coming off the bench. Anthony Wiggins has had another good season to build on. So I think Minnesota's a team that you can look. They're currently in 12th, but they're a team that certainly can move up the standings real quickly if they can just string together a series of wins and play more consistently. But in terms of all-star snubs, really, I think the league did a good job this year in picking the teams. Do you guys have any snubs that you guys think that were left out?
Joel Embiid. I mean, he's averaging 20 points, 8 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks in under 26 minutes a game. That's completely ridiculous for a rookie. And the only reason why I think the coaches didn't really consider him is because he hasn't played enough minutes. I mean, he's on that minutes restriction because of his injuries. But I understand why the coaches would have picked Paul Millsap over him. I mean, Paul Millsap is averaging 18 points, 8 boards, and a block in 34 minutes. And Embiid's stats are clearly better than his, but the Hawks are 27-20 and fourth in the East. So I understand why the coaches would pick him over Embiid. But yeah, from the East, I would say Joel Embiid in place of Paul Millsap.
Yeah, and I just have CJ McCollum and Karl-Anthony Towns in the West. And McCollum and Lillard really have had good seasons despite how bad their team has played. And Karl-Anthony Towns, as I just mentioned, he's putting up monster numbers, 22 points, 12 rebounds. Granted, the team doesn't have a really good record, but the way he's played, his game, and Embiid as well, the evolution of the big in this game where they can just step out and shoot threes and like really play like guards out there. They can distribute the ball from the top. They can do behind the back dribble moves, that sort of thing. It is outstanding.
What do you think of the Warriors having 4 All-Stars?
I don't have any huge disagreement. I maybe would have, out of the 4, I might have subbed McCollum in for Thompson. I think Thompson has not had as good a year shooting the ball, but I mean, they have the best record in the league by far. And so if any team deserves to have 4 All-Stars, I think it's them.
Yeah, I agree and to a certain extent, but I think either, like you said, Lillard, I mean, he has some insane numbers. And I think either Lillard or Conley should have gotten it over Clay. Clay's having a great year shooting the ball, but I mean, he's playing his role perfectly, but he's sort of been relegated to the 4th option on his team in a sense. And most of his shots are pretty much catch and shoot threes. And he needs guys like Steph and Katie to set him up. And Clay, I don't think he can really create his own shot. And that's not very like all-star like. Like you want someone in an all-star game who can, do like ISO moves and create his own shot. But there was an interesting stat floating around that it was like 85% of Clay shots are assisted. That seems crazy to me. I think Lillard, I mean, the season that he's having, he's putting up monster numbers, 26 points, 6 assists. He should have more All-Star appearances in his career in the future. And Conley's having a really good season too. I feel like he's been underrated, as he always has been. But they already have Marc Gasol in the All-Star game. So it's like the coaches, they feel maybe having 2 Grizzlies in there is a stretch. And same thing for the Jazz. Like, yeah, shout out to Gordon Hayward on his first All-Star appearance, and well-deserved. I personally feel Rudy Gobert should have been put in over DeAndre Jordan. I mean, Gobert is clearly the best defensive player in the league. But like I said before, having 2 Jazz players in there might have been a stretch for the coaches. And the fact that Chris Paul wasn't even considered as an All-Star, DeAndre might have gotten like a sympathy vote. It's like, maybe we should have at least 1 Clipper in there, just so it all balances out. For me personally, I think Gobert should have been in over Jordan, and either Lillard or Conley over Klay Thompson.
Yeah, the 3 really all-star mainstays, and Chris Paul, Dwayne Wade, and Carmelo Anthony not making it. So really a changing in the guard in terms of all-star appearances this year. But Kevin, thank you so much for being on your first time, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on.
All right. See ya.
Okay, Nathan, so let's talk briefly about the NFL last week. Really, Championship Sunday turned into Destruction Sunday. The Falcons and the Packers, the first game. I watched this one looking for it to be a shootout between Aaron Rodgers and Matt Ryan, and only one half of that happened. Green Bay's defense, which really played pretty decently against the Giants and against the Cowboys, they played okay, just enough to win. but they were terrible on Sunday. Atlanta splits them early and often. Julio Jones, they couldn't guard. They couldn't stop the running game. They couldn't get off the field. And the Falcons defense, as you mentioned last week, they got pressure on Aaron Rodgers, and their secondary played pretty well as well. Any takeaways from that NFC Championship game?
Well, my biggest takeaway is, why did the Cowboys lose to this Green Bay team? I mean, like, granted, I mean, I looking back, I understand why, and just again, like what we talked about last week, and with the Cowboys getting off to that slow start and just like being down a ridiculous 18 points in the first half. But I mean, just looking at how Atlanta just completely lit up this Green Bay defense, and I'm just beside myself as to like why we didn't like further run Zeke, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, kudos to Matt Ryan. He's pretty much proving why he's the MVP of this league. I mean, and even then, he has like the best surrounding cast in arguably the entire NFL, like we mentioned before. And something that's a little bit unsung about this Falcons team is that they have Mr. Quinn. He was the one that helped build that Seattle defense that went to back-to-back Super Bowls and won one. And he's very clearly helped rebuild this Atlanta team, who at the beginning of the year everyone's saying was going to be kind of weak, but I mean he's found one of the best pass rushers in the league in Vic Beasley, and he's helping with this secondary, and it's really helping with this secondary that, while it doesn't necessarily have like the big names, has a lot of potential, has a lot of talent. That can help fill in. And I think also just part of it is just like, I think they find like Aaron Rodgers like just finally like kind of snapped a bit, and it clearly, like, the pressure clearly bothered him throughout most of the game. And this entire Green Bay Packers team is Aaron Rodgers. And just, I mean, and granted, kudos to Jordy Nelson for coming back with broken ribs and still being able to contribute somewhat. But I mean, like, if Aaron Rodgers is not focused and can't carry this team, then what we saw happened. I was hoping for a closer game with both this one and the one and the one on the other side of the bracket. I mean, especially after the close games that we did have the week before, but it looks like it was a return to the wild card weekend in which everything's a blowout. But whatever. Yeah, what do you have to say?
Just a shout out to Kyle Shanahan. He is a great offensive mind, great offensive coordinator. Everywhere he's gone, I mean, he comes under his dad, Mike Shanahan, and Gary Kubiak, that type of offense. He turned Matt Schaub, an average quarterback, into the number one passing offense when he was here with the Texans. And he had success in Washington with the Redskins, and he's brought that to Atlanta. He's really rejuvenated Matt Ryan's career. Matt Ryan, when he came out of college, really burst onto the scene and was a rising star in his league. But the past couple of years, he's been really kind of average. I had him on my fantasy team, so I know his stats were kind of down. And so the year he's had, credit to Kyle Shanahan. Also, a shout out to Matt Schaub, who's a backup quarterback on that team. He's going to be going to the Super Bowl in Houston, something that maybe he thought he'd never do. Richard Smith, who is a defensive coordinator here, Brooks Reed, who is a linebacker here, and Jake Matthews, who's from the Houston area. So they're all coming to Houston for the Super Bowl. So well-deserved. Congrats to the Falcons. I'll certainly be rooting for them. I feel Atlanta and Houston have a kind of a tie as cities that haven't won any championships since the mid-90s with the Braves and the Rockets respectively. So, shout out to Atlanta and the Falcons, and I'll be rooting for them here at the Super Bowl.
Absolutely. And the fun fact, Kyle Shanahan is a former Longhorn. So he learned under Mac Brown too. So, yeah.
Yeah, and they'll be playing the Patriots. The Patriots destroyed the Steelers in the AFC Championship. Pittsburgh lost Le'Veon Bell early, and really that was lights out for them, it seemed. Their secondary got shredded by Tom Brady. interesting point during the broadcast. Pittsburgh was playing a lot of zone coverage and can't play zone defense against Tom Brady. He'll pick you apart, and that's basically what he did. What did you take away from the AFC game?
Yeah, that was my biggest takeaway, was just the fact that the Steelers like seemed to refuse to put any sort of pressure on Brady until it was far too late, and it just made no sense, especially since like at least, I mean, granted, like their pass rush isn't necessarily the best in the league, but I mean, like you have James Harrison who still finds a way to like still contribute at his old age, and you have like Ryan Shazier who should be at least a decent person to go get at the quarterback, but they refused to do that, and because of that, like Brady was like, okay, I'm just gonna go find this guy named Kevin Hogan, another no-name receiver, and turn him into a star, which they seem to always do, but it baffled me to watch this game and see how this Killer Bees was not very killer. Yeah, I mean, so long, Pittsburgh. I mean, I can't say I'm sad to see him go. I mean, what I find far more interesting with this Pittsburgh team is what's happening in their locker room, and the drama behind there. But it's the Patriots are now in another Super Bowl. Brady's in another Super Bowl. I mean, he's arguably the greatest quarterback of all time, and he further proves it this week. And so we're going into the Super Bowl. It looks like it could be a shootout, and it also looks like it could be kind of a blowout, considering the way things have been trending. But I mean, we'll see. What are your thoughts for the upcoming Super Bowl? If we want to like quickly do a quick preview of it before going further in depth next week.
Yeah. So I think number one question is, how does New England's defense play against Atlanta's offense? So the Patriots, they had a really good defensive ranking in the regular season, but that was a lot of their competition that they beat up on, in the Jets and the Bills and the Dolphins and the Texans. They played twice. And Pittsburgh's offense was not coming off a good game against Kansas City. So you could say that their road to the Super Bowl, they haven't really played an offense like they'll see in Atlanta. So how does their defense hold up against the Falcons? Because Atlanta, what they did against Seattle and Green Bay, the Patriots should be concerned because that is just, the amount of speed on the field is scary. And also on the flip side, as you mentioned, Pittsburgh didn't get pressure on Brady, and they just allowed him to pick their defense apart. If Atlanta doesn't do that, their defense is not as good as Pittsburgh's. And so, I mean, as you mentioned, it could turn into a shootout. So I really think how either team's defense sets up against the other team's offense. I mean, defense wins championships, right? So that's going to play a big role coming into this week.
I agree with everything except the last part that Pittsburgh had the better defense compared to Atlanta. I would actually argue that Atlanta has the better defense, and here's why. Atlanta's had to play far better teams than New England or Pittsburgh has had to do, or outside of like obviously having to play the Cowboys that 1 week. But at the same time, like this Falcons team really, like I think this Falcons team will be able to get pressure, or should be able to get pressure on Brady. And I think the other funny thing about this Patriots team is that they traded away two of their best players on defense in both Jamie Collins and Chandler Jones, and so what's going to be interesting for me is how this Patriots team is able to hold up when they could have been going in with two Pro Bowlers. Like they had two quality defensive players that they decided to pretty much just get rid of for 2 third-round picks, and because of that, I think they're going in a little bit undermanned, especially compared to what they could have had they not done those trades. I mean, the bigger question to me with Atlanta is whether or not their inexperience is going to get to them, and if they're going to have a ton of nervousness going into this game. Because I mean, the big thing with the Patriots is that they've been here, they've done it, they've done everything under the sun. when it comes to a Super Bowl, except for winning a blowout. And so I mean, maybe Brady, that's the one thing Brady has on his bucket list right now, and that's something he's going to gun for. And obviously you can never count out how any sort of like sly trickery Bill Belichick does to get the upper hand. Whether it be pulling a fire alarm or videotaping Falcons practices. I mean, the possibilities are endless with him. But yeah, so they gotta shut things down, and hopefully the Falcons could get a good night's rest before the game.
Yeah. So we'll preview more next week as the game gets closer. And it should be a good game in Houston, and hopefully weather is good as well. Maybe they can open the roof and that stadium for once. Let out the stink of the Texans. But
yeah, maybe. Oh, a quick question: do you plan on doing any sort of festivities while the Super Bowl's there?
Yeah, I might get down there to one of those fairs. The traffic in Houston is infamous for being really bad, and so with all the out of towners, it might just be better to stay home. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Let's briefly do some shout outs.
Let's start off with a sad shout out. MLB has just lost another young star in Yordana Ventura, as well as Andy Marte, both who died, I believe, within a 24-hour span down in the Dominican Republic due to drunk driving incidents. I mean, they pretty much died within the same neighborhood, as well as like kind of the same neighborhood that Oscar Tavares, another young star, promising young star who died because of a young drunk driving incident. And this is the second time within less than a year's span, even arguably less than a 6-month span, that a young pitcher has lost his life due to alcohol and operating a vehicle while drunk. And this does bring up an interesting question as to like what will MLB do to try to stop these tragedies from happening again. I mean, clearly, while I have to assume they tell their players not to drink and drive either a car or a boat, or I mean obviously plane, at the same time, I mean, like how do you stop people from doing what they're obviously going to try to do in their free time? I mean, how many times do these examples have to happen before before people try being a lot more careful? And it's just, I mean, it's real tragic. I mean, I feel for these families. Condolences to them. Condolences to their friends. It's sad. It really is sad to see this. I mean, just sad, and like it goes. I mean, obviously not just like if when an MLB player or any sort of player this happens to. I mean, obviously, with anyone in general. I mean, losing a life is sad, and it's especially when it's something that could have been prevented. That just makes it even sadder. But that's all I have to say on that. What about your shout out?
Yeah, so on a slightly happier note, happy Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year to everyone, Year of the Rooster. Also, shout out to the Williams sisters and the folks at the Australian Open for tennis. So it was a really dream throwback finals, with the women being Serena against Venus. Serena beat Venus last night in straight sets. And on the men's side tonight, it's going to be Rafael Nadal against Roger Federer. So it might be the last final for those aging stars, two of the best that ever played. So the match will start at 2:30 Central Time in the morning in Australia, but so maybe catch the highlights in the morning. But Nadal versus Federer and Serena versus Venus down at the Australian Open. So shout out to them.
Yeah, no, definitely throwback. I remember, if I could add, I remember I believe it was 2002 when 2002 was the last time I remember Venus and was the first time I remember Venus and Serena playing in the finals. But also that same year, it was Pete Sampras versus Andre Agassi, and this matchup between Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal definitely reminds me of that matchup back then, because it was obviously like two aging superstars who were kind of in the twilight of their prime, twilight of their career, but are still, I mean, arguably the far and away the best players in their generation, and are like arguably the best that have ever played. And this definitely reminds me of that U.S. Open back in the day. And this, I mean, it should be a lot of fun. And shout out to Serena for getting the best of her older sister. And yeah, gonghae fatchoy, son yi fai lo. Yeah, boom, 1.5 Asians. Here we go. Bow.
Okay, well, that wraps it up for this week. I'll talk to you next week. Super Bowl week in Houston.
Yeah, cool. You have a great week.
Yeah, you too.